On this day, 1995, Ron Howard's sensational Apollo 13 opens in theaters, not only drawing incredible critical praise, but grossing more than $355 million at the box office.
Their heart rates are skyrocketing.
We have a 401 alarm.
That can't be real.
Man, it is fighting me, Jack. What's the story here?
I keep losing radio signal.
That can't happen. It's got to be instrumentation.
And we got some serious time pressure here. We're looking at less than 15 minutes of life support left.
Like they're all over the place. Damn, we're losing it.
We never lost an American in space. We're sure as hell not going to lose one on my watch.
And a hearty welcome and happy Sunday to one and all. This is episode 230 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Unbeknownst to me, today is anniversary of a film's release that I am a huge fan of. And always have been since seeing it on its opening day, which I guess was a Friday, 29 years ago. The film in question, which opened in the United States on June 30th, 1995, is Ron Howard's sensational adaptation of NASA flyboy Jim Lovell's novel, Lost Moon, Apollo 13. Apollo 13 is not a docudrama, but at the same time, it's not historical fiction. Most of what the movie puts forth happened in more or less the sequence the movie portrays it as. There were a couple of adjustments. Characters in real life learned something sooner or later, or never found out, or, okay, this scene was concocted, this tension between these characters didn't really happen. But an overwhelming percentage of this film is true. It is a true story of Apollo 13. The true story is lost to history because there are segments of the mission that no one knows exactly what happened at this point. They know a lot though. And Ron Howard was committed to realism, to having the maximum verisimilitude in his film. He wasn't going to cut any corners. I don't want to say he made the film through NASA, but as much as possible, he tried to recreate weightless space flight and simulations and G-force indicators, and he really wanted his actors to mentally, psychologically, emotionally think like the real guys. Think like astronauts, not just you're an actor coming to set to read your lines. And James Cameron, from a different perspective, he did this during filming of The Abyss, where when Ed Harris, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, Michael Biehn, some of the other performers in the film got to set on the first day, and what James Cameron allegedly told them was, "Welcome to my nightmare," which was another way of saying, you're not just actors picking up a paycheck on this film. You're going to be put through the ringer as if this is real. And there were probably a lot of uncomfortable moments for Tom Hanks and Gary Sinise and Kevin Bacon and the late, great Bill Paxton. But they all came through like champs. And from a historical perspective, Tom Hanks-centric, it's interesting that Hanks's run of consecutive Best Actor wins, Philadelphia in 93, or it was a film released in 93, Forrest Gump in 94. I think that his performance is just as strong in Apollo 13. And if somebody were to ask me the question out of context, what is the single best moment in Tom Hanks's entire acting career? For me, it comes at the end of Apollo 13. This is not even a spoiler, where he is among his co-pilots, his brothers, so to speak, Bill Paxton and Kevin Bacon, and there is still uncertainty. The way Tom Hanks says the line, Gentlemen, it's been a privilege flying with you. He doesn't put any unusual inflection on the dialogue. It's not a off-kilter line reading, but the sincerity, the gravity in his voice, the understanding of what the stakes are. What are the odds that they're not going to be dead in a couple of minutes? Whatever it might be. He balances everything, whatever fear, emotion, hope, hopeless. Hank somehow imbues that one line reading with everything. It is an extraordinary performance through and through. And, I guess they didn't want to give him 3 consecutive Best Actor nominations, let alone 3 straight wins. But 95 is kind of a weak year in general. It's the only year in the 90s that, relatively speaking, is weak. Doesn't mean there aren't films that I consider great films in 95, such as this one. Oliver Stone's Nixon, pretty damn good. Mike Figgis, Leaving Las Vegas, very, very good. And Nick Cage won the Oscar for that. And I love Braveheart. For all the talk about historical inaccuracies. Who knows what percentage of Braveheart was true? Cinematically, phenomenal. So there are good movies in that year. But I love Richard Dreyfuss and Mr. Holland's Opus, but you put a gun to my head, yeah, I think Tom Hanks is Jim Lovell. Yeah. Sorry. I mean, Michael Douglas in The American President had as much claim as anybody to a nomination. That's a kind of underrated, slept on, terrific film from the 90s. Heat, with Al Pacino, Val Kilmer, and Bobby D. Michael Mann, that could have been up for Best Picture. Do I think that's better than Leaving Las Vegas? Yeah, I do. Yeah. I'll take that over Oliver Stone's Nixon. No offense to my fellow New York University graduate, Oliver Stone, who's made some of my favorite movies, such as JFK. But Ron Howard outdid himself. And I know that he ended up winning Oscar for A Beautiful Mind, a film I like a lot. But if, just as I said with Tom Hanks, if somebody off the top of their head says, are you a fan of Ron Howard? Yeah, love the guy. New York Yankees fan, way to go. What's your favorite Ron Howard film? Apollo 13. This film gets so many things exactly right. From the feel of the time period, which is not always easy to capture, the spirit of a time. From the feel of the time period to the fact that the technology is simultaneously unbelievably advanced and primitive, which is completely fucked up and not what we're used to thinking and feeling and comprehending in 2024, not even in 1995. The internet is nothing then like it is now, but information was traveling faster, and I know damn well that astronauts in space in a tuna can, hurtling at thousands of miles per hour, hundreds of thousands of miles away. I know that the astronauts of 1995 were not doing calculations on the fly with a pencil and paper. That is a level of fuckery that I was shocked by in the movie. Jim, we're going to need your gimbal conversion. What the hell is a gimbal? What the hell is a gigawatt? Yeah, what the hell is a gimbal? And what is he doing with a pencil in space? What? All those details, the film gets perfect. And I remember reading reviews. The advance buzz was very, very strong. And all of the local critics, Newsday, the lead critic at the time, John Anderson, very good film critic, one of my favorites. And he was a guy who wrote for Newsday primarily, but his work was syndicated across the country because he was really good. He loved it, and he was not a guy that gave 4 stars very often. He could be a bit of a crank. He wasn't Pauline Kael or John Simon level crank. But Anderson had the kind of sarcasm of a Roger Ebert, and I feel like he was a rougher critic than Ebert. But when John Anderson gave it 4 stars, and he basically said, for those of you who know the story, you kind of know how it ends. He said, but there's a moment in the film where the tension builds to an unbearable level. And he pointed out in the review, I knew how this turned out. And I still, in the moment, I almost forgot. And I was sensing incredible danger. And oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. He said, this movie has a moment of relief, a sigh of relief that rivals anything I've ever seen. His words. And you go on Rotten Tomatoes now, it's 96%. That is a higher score than more than half of the Best Picture winners in the last 50 years. I don't know that, but I am going to go down on the hill that my best guess, Best Picture winners are less than 96%. This is a movie that, even though it didn't win Best Picture, probably should have. We knew it wasn't going to because Ron Howard wasn't up for director. And there was a time where those things were more or less in lockstep. You know, Driving Miss Daisy, when Bruce Beresford somehow wasn't nominated for director, it was a big upset. Well, how did it win Best Picture? Billy Crystal sticking up for Bruce Beresford at the Oscars. He said, yeah, I guess the film just directed itself, right? Fucking stupid. He didn't say fucking stupid, but it's like, what are we doing? The story goes that on Ron Howard's next film, as luck would have it, he was making Ransom with Mel Gibson. And the two of them were in the, I don't know if they were in the editing room, whatever it was just these two guys together. Maybe they were going over a scene that Mel was playing along. I don't know. But what I do know is they received the Oscar nominations for films released in 1995 at the same time. Mel was nominated for picture and director, and he was incredulous when Ron Howard was not nominated for director. Are you fucking kidding me? Now, I'm sure Mel was just thrilled that he was up for picture and director, but he always came across like, I love Apollo 13. How could Ron not get nominated? He went the extra mile and a half. He was not simply a director showing up and having the actors hit their marks. Let's go home and have, let's have burgers and fries and have a milkshake. He gave everything he had to that. Somehow did not get a Best Director nomination. The principal cast, of which I will count Gary Sinise as Ken Mattingly, Bill Paxton as Fred Hayes, Kevin Bacon as Jack Swigert, Tom Hanks as Jim Lovell, and I guess we can throw Ed Harris as Gene Kranz, who was the head, basically was the flight director at NASA, whatever. He pretty much was running it and calling the shots, running point at NASA in the world of this film and in real life. The performers are all so believable. And even though each of them have certain line readings and vocal inflections that we've seen in other films, it feels to me as if they are crafting these characters. They all feel three-dimensional. There is no stereotypical important character. And Kathleen Quinlan got an Oscar nomination for supporting actress. I do feel Marilyn Lovell is not as strong a character as she could have been, but Kathleen Quinlan sure looks good in the film. And the fear, uncertainty comes through. And I think that's why she got the nomination. I don't think it was like a courtesy nomination because the film was popular. But she does represent worried spouses who want to be supportive of their partners, whether it's the guy or the girl. You want to be supportive. You love this person, and when they come to you with what they consider to be the best news they've ever gotten, you want to be happy for them and with them. And Kathleen Quinlan, in that, it's a great scene where she learns that her husband is going to the moon on Apollo 13. And the initial excitement, seeing that he's bouncing up and down like a little kid, gives way to the reality that no matter how you slice it, there is a percentage chance, whether it's 10%, whether it's 16.2%, there is a legitimate percentage chance you're going to die, just based on everything we've seen to this point. She can't shake that. And some people at the time, and even now, might criticize the ridiculousness of her losing a wedding ring, and that didn't happen in real life. But the idea of 13, bad luck, my husband always wanted this, but maybe we'll lose him in space. And then when shit starts to go wrong, the premonition, the fear seems to be coming to fruition. So for those who don't know, the true story of Apollo 13 and Ron Howard's movie, the main beats are identical. Man had already walked on the moon. Was it July 13, 1969? Neil Armstrong. And Neil Armstrong is in the movie. There's an actor playing him. I won't spoil it if you haven't seen the movie. He had a very funny scene with the astronauts in space where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin sit and watch the unfolding stuff with Apollo 13 with Jim Lovell's mom, who is played in real life by Ron Howard's own mom, and she is fucking hilarious. She is amazing. Because it could have, again, another throwaway character who is not a throwaway character. The doddering grandma. You know, she seems like she doesn't know which end is up and she's out to lunch, but it turns out she is not out to lunch at all. And her one-liner about don't you worry, where she calms down her daughter-in-law and her granddaughter. She calms them down with a joke, but in her eyes is steel and an unshakable belief that her son, Jim or Jimmy, is coming home. You can be scared. You can be scared. You can all be scared. But I know my Jimmy. It's the best moment in the film. It's heartwarming. It might make you tear up, and it will make you laugh. You don't get that from a throwaway character or a thankless role. But the setup is that Jim Lovell has, to the point in the movie, 1970, I guess it is, has flown in space more than anyone else. He's had the most actual time in space and has not been to the moon, and now has been selected to go to the moon with Fred Hayes Jr., that's Bill Paxton, and Gary Sinise's Ken Mattingly, who is a great astronaut flyer and probably a genius on top of that. Now, they're all highly intelligent. You don't get into NASA without probably 150 plus IQ. And that's historically always been the case. But Ken Mattingly is presented as maybe the most intelligent guy in whatever room he enters. So they're ready, they're trained, and they're ready to go. And then there's a problem because one of the guys they had been working with has measles. Now, that doesn't mean anything today. The vast majority of all of us, we've gotten our shots. So I could schmooze, I could have lunch with a guy and somebody says, hey, Jared, you know, Richie's contracted measles. How you feeling? Feeling fine. I got inoculated for the measles when I was a baby. Well, in the world of Apollo 13, people who were kids in the 1920s, the 1930s, there was no vaccine. You either got measles or you didn't. You may have died, you may have suffered permanent impairment, or maybe you didn't. So as a 21-year-old watching the film, when we get to the moment in the movie, we're gearing up for Gary Sinise and Tom Hanks and Bill Paxton to go into space. And I remember wondering, I don't understand why Kevin Bacon, why would they hire him for this part? He's an alternate. He's not, why would he ever get to go in space? So the moment in the film where, forget the name of the actor, but plays Deke Slayton, who himself was one of the earliest of the Flyboys. He was involved in the first missions with the Alan Shepard and those guys and John Glenn. When he kind of corners Tom Hanks and says, we got a problem. One of our guys has measles. You all have been working with him. And Tom Hanks answers, he's almost bewildered. He says, I've already had the measles. Well, Ken Mattingly hasn't. Oops. So in this case, the 1970 level knowledge of measles was the same. There just was no vaccine. If you had it, you're not getting it again. Like with chicken pox. I'm part of the generation, there was no chicken pox vaccine. I simply got the chicken pox. I got my natural immunity because I got sick with chicken pox when I was 15, and I'm not going to get it again. There is a slight chance, if I'm exposed, if it hits me wrong, I could maybe develop mild symptoms. It's the same sort of thing with measles, but you're not getting sick is the point. But because Ken Mattingly had not gotten the measles, they got to scrub him. There's nothing they can do. Now, they don't know for 100% certain that he's going to go up into space if they pretend, let's say the doctor just decides, you know what? So many things have gone wrong with the fucking space program. How many people have died in the last 10, 12 years on our watch? let's just keep this quiet and hope that he doesn't get sick of it. No. They scrub Gary Sinise, Ken Mattingly from the launch, and he is not happy about it. But you understand why they did it. Because if you're up there and you're on day 3 and you start to develop measles, how are you going to do your job? They don't just send 3 people up there for shits and giggles. Each man performs a series of functions, but if 2 people could do it, they would send 2 people, is the idea. They need all 3 of them. They need all 3 of them healthy. And that's how Kevin Bacon's Jack Swigert ends up in the crew. But he's not up to speed, and the movie toys with the idea that that is problematic. The guys get together, and Ken Mattingly pretty much flies the coop. He's so upset. He wishes them a good mission. He likes Swigert's strong. He's going to be okay, Jack, I know. But we get the sense of foreboding. This can't be good. They're all trained to be together. They have been working in unison for months, and now we're bringing someone else in. Yeah, we know the guy, but who knows what's going to happen? So they go up, and we see an interesting historical tidbit, which is that the guys broadcast while they were early in the mission en route to the moon. And they were under the impression it was going to be a huge, like a TV event where all the major networks were going to carry them in space, like a simulcast. This would have been one of the first of that kind, the technology of not so much radar, but satellites and all of that. It was new technology. The picture probably looked like shit, but they were able to at least do it. But it turned out the major networks didn't give a shit anymore because we've already been to the moon. People aren't interested. So they did this whole rigmarole, and the only people who really saw it were those who were at mission control, which included Marilyn Lovell and the wives of the other astronauts and the families. They didn't tell the guys, you're not even on TV. This whole thing is basically farce. But when they get a little bit further into the mission, there is a massive fuck-up. And the film teases the idea that there is an issue that Jack Swigert, the Kevin Bacon character, didn't stir the tanks correctly, the oxygen tanks. And it triggered, there's a spark, and the next thing you know, the main module is fucked. And it is going to be almost impossible to get them home. The moon, forget that. It's why the title of Jim Lovell's book is Lost Moon. Because within a very short span of time, they went from Apollo 13 was a moon landing mission. Collect moon rocks. We're going to be able to do scientific experiments that we couldn't do with the Armstrong landing. It went from that to they're probably all going to die in a matter of seconds. And the film gets all of that across without hitting us over the head. We get it. We understand the stakes. We understand the odds. The lunar module has incredible capabilities, but there are certain things it was not specifically built to do. They're just going to have to improvise and hope that that bird is even better than advertised. So I won't obviously spoil any major plot twists, other than to say that the real mission, when you listen to audio, there's no hint of dissension amongst the astronauts. The movie kind of plays with the idea that maybe Swigert fucked up, and it kind of makes it seem as if Fred Hayes did not appreciate Swigert and was convinced he probably shouldn't be on this mission. Well, he wasn't going to be on this mission. And there's some acrimony, and there are a couple of moments where the guys are almost arguing. That didn't happen. That was stretched for dramatic purposes. It's fiction, right? It's fiction based on fact. And those scenes are very strong to see the actors under incredible duress try to work through what would be real arguments. If these are 2 guys sitting having coffee and something like this came up, they might come to blows. But you're in space, you got about 74 problems at the same time, and getting into a catfight, as Tom Hanks says, we'll just go bouncing off the walls and we'll end up with the exact same problems. We've got to stay focused here. The movie never preaches, and there is not much in the way, there's a little bit of what you would call religious themes. But the concept of prayer in this film, it's done in such a way that I feel like even an atheist would not necessarily think that they're being talked down to or preached to. Like, it's logical that, okay, we're going to have a pastor or preacher or a reverend with us during re-entry. You know, when everybody is, we don't know, it's no better than 50-50 that they're going to make it, or whatever it might be. James Horner's musical score, man, he was so good. It's hard to believe he's been gone almost a decade. And you want to talk about a wunderkind, somebody who was just came out of the gate firing one incredible musical score after another. When he did Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, the guy was in his 20s. What a fucking maestro. What a genius. His score, his themes, and some of the memorable motifs from Apollo 13 do have a hymn-like quality. But it works because the guys are traveling towards the heavens and coming back from the heavens, whether or not you even believe in that. They're going places that very few people could even dream of or conceive of, and they're doing it. And the music is such a complimentary with an E. It is such a complimentary component. It adds to the feel. It adds to the emotion of the film. And yeah, without spoiling it, the moment of relief, the sigh of relief, that's real. The film builds to an unbelievable climax, even though we're pretty sure how it's going to turn out. You are on the edge of your seat. You are gnawing at your fingernails. You are gripping your theater seat. My dad knew the story. He remembered. And, you know, he didn't give me any spoilers before the film because I didn't really want to know everything about it. Nowadays, it's difficult to avoid a true story like this. I mean, to call it spoilers, it's history, right? But I do remember after seeing that film, it immediately jumped into probably my top maybe 20 movies I'd ever seen. I loved it, first frame to last. For me, there is not a single missed beat or wasted moment. The shots of Mission Control, Ron Howard's editing alone, the way that he paced it should have gotten him an Oscar nomination. There's no blueprint for, because they shoot all of the Mission Control sequences probably in a couple of days. That might be months before or months after the guys in the tin can, where they're supposed to be in space, but they're on a soundstage somewhere, somewhere near Hollywood, Beverly Hills, or LA. I don't think they were out here on Long Island, although they do mention Beth Page once, presumably Grumman. They were headed back at a certain point. But the editing in the film, the cuts from in space, Mission Control, Marilyn Lovell, Ed Harris, there is not one moment that does not feel, or that calls attention to itself, oh, this is just showing off. The rhythm of the cutting, the pacing of the editing, it's just extraordinary. There's no other word for it. Right now, Apollo 13 is streaming free on Apple. And it's available to rent on Prime. It was on Netflix earlier this year, and I think last year for quite some time. But it is a movie, and I hate spending other people's money. I always talk about, I don't care if it's $2. I don't like spending other people's money. But I will vouch for this movie is worth the $2 rental on Amazon Prime. It is that good. It's, for me, the best space film, certainly the most accessible. You want to argue 2001: A Space Odyssey, I'm not going to take issue with you. It's a totally different kind of film. The history is so great, and this movie's representation of that history is exemplary. I give the movie a 10 out of 10. It is almost a perfect film. The few laughs are a welcome break, and the tension for a movie that is suitable for all audiences, it is almost unbearably tense for at least the last hour. And that is not easy to do, especially in a true story. Apollo 13, released on this day, June 30th, 1995, directed by Ron Howard and starring Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, Gary Sinise, Bill Paxton, Kathleen Quinlan, and Ed Harris. This has been episode 230 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday morning here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 231 real soon. Until then, Houston, we have a problem.